My next guest is Keith Belvin. He is a certified crisis specialist, personal and marriage counselor, award winning author, and educational consultant who listens to and helps address emotional problems through person centered counseling. Keith works with men, women, children, couples by addressing their current issues and works to help them become experts in their lives and feelings. In addition, Keith helps mentor many to become more self aware of how powerful they are indeed are and were created to be. He's friendly and transparent style, makes him the perfect person to open up to and communicate your problems to. Welcome to the podcast, Keith.
Thank you for having me, Dan. I appreciate it. I was looking forward to it since we had gotten disconnected before. So I'm actually excited to be here. So thank you for having me.
Yeah, and it's exciting to talk with somebody on the podcast who has a background in education, but it's also you've done a lot of writing on helping young people and just raise conversations in general. So we'll get into many different topics on the podcast. But as we start off, as I ask everybody, tell me about a time when you were in the trenches and managed to call out.
Oh, thank you. Well, for me, there's been a few, but I'll keep it towards education since you mentioned being an educator. When I first started teaching for the New York City Department of Education in 1998, I had spent 2.5 years previously working with autistic and emotionally disturbed students. I had the opportunity to move into working with the city. So I'm like, okay, great opportunity, more money, and also put me closer to home. But I was working in a very difficult neighborhood. And in Brooklyn, when a bad neighborhood is labeled bad, it's very difficult. Well, my first year, we lost 2 students to gang violence and other street violence. And a part of me, it just didn't make sense to me. Well, it turns out over the next 6 years, I would lose 9 students. And I think what the hardest was, I remember going to the wake of one of the students that I had been working with and trying so hard to get him off of the streets that I remember saying to the mother that I'm sorry, I did everything I could do. I'm sorry, I just couldn't persuade him from being on the streets. And I remember the mother saying to me, I know you did Mr. B, and that's what the kids called me. I know you did Mr. B, but I got 5 other kids I got to concern myself with. And that hit me because the fact that the mother couldn't grieve because she was still so concerned about her other children, that it really just knocked me for a loop, because it was like, this is just not the way this is supposed to be. Like, life is not supposed to be like this, and schools are not supposed to be like this. And for me, what that did was it pushed me to have to try to figure out, how do I reach these kids? How do I protect these kids? How do I do more? But I think the hardest part with that is that I literally was taking in the negatives from the neighborhood. And like every Friday, me and other educators and myself, I want to say that correctly, we'd end up at Applebee's at 3:15 in the afternoon, and we were there until 8, 9 o'clock. And what I realized, that I was slowly losing myself at home.
Yeah.
I was taking in the negativity, and it was affecting me at home with my own children and my own situation, because I had been married before. And that really pushed me to a point where I had to say, do what you can. But when the day is over, put your hat on the rack, as they say, and put the books down, and then just focus on home. And that separation allowed me to be able to at least keep my feet up under me, or I think I might have just quit and walked away. I wound up doing another 16 and a half years until I left New York to come to Delaware. But any educator who's worked in a very difficult situation, we understand the systems are going to be bad. But when you're actually losing children who on one day you taught a child, and on the next day you're hearing that that child is no longer on this planet, it shakes you up. But I also think that the blessing in that, if there is any, it moved me towards the understanding of why counseling was important, which wound up becoming my second career. So that would be my time in the trenches, which is very difficult, was very difficult.
Yeah, and like a lot of people who have moved into counseling from like a law enforcement background or security officer background, I've known a few of those. who've seen a lot of what you're talking about, and, realize that let's try to do some prevention.
Yeah.
And as we see a lot more now in the last few years, and the need for counseling as well.
Hmm.
So let's talk a little bit about some of the writing that you've done. First of all, I did mention you are an award-winning author, and you've written 6 books, and you've been featured in 7 others, and you're also finishing up a few more books. So if you would highlight a few of those, or you could talk about those books that you're finishing up.
Sure. I've written everything from poetry to fiction, nonfiction,
Mhm.
self-help. As well as you mentioned, I've been featured in a few anthologies over the years. The thing I guess I'm the most proud would be my memoir, which is called From Gigolo to Jesus.
Mhm.
Um, it's my own personal transformation story. And I
Mhm.
explained that for 37 years, my life wasn't behind the scenes what I really wanted it to be. And I was really misogynistic, I guess, and
Mhm.
narcissistic. I guess you could put all the things that men struggle with there. And then I had a change of faith in terms of just reacquiring my faith.
Mhm.
I realized that I needed to become somebody different. So when that transformation happened, I had failed my first marriage, and just things were spiraling out of control. So once I was able to get myself together, I went back to write a book about it because I felt that if I could share, in the way I normally say this, if I could share all my dirt
Mhm.
and put out there what I was for basically 37 years,
Mhm.
then it would make these last 18 make sense. And
Mhm.
also would make these last 18 stand on its own, because I think one of the things that I would hear often is people say men don't change, people don't change,
Mhm.
women don't change. No, that's not true. You do change if the influences and the environments that you're in change. So
Mhm.
for me, it took reacquiring a connection to faith to give me the roadway, the pathway that I needed to
Mhm.
move into a better position. So I put it in a book, From Gigolo to Jesus. My very first book was poetry, and it
Mhm.
was called A Man in Transition. And it was interesting because everybody said, "Don't publish poetry; it doesn't sell. Nobody wants to buy poetry." And what I realized was that, okay, I won't sell poetry. I'll sell me. And I would
Mhm.
literally have the pieces. I only chose about 3 pieces from the book. And everywhere I
Mhm.
went, I would read those 3 pieces. And one was dedicated to my wife, one was dedicated to my mother, and one was dedicated to the mothers who have to deal with fathers who weren't doing what they were supposed to do. And I won some awards for that. And then From Gigolo to Jesus is the book that got me featured in first Ebony, and
Mhm.
then I was invited to be a part of Black Expressions Book Club. And Black Expressions Book Club back in the let's see, mid 2000s
Mhm.
was a big online book club that a lot of African American authors wanted to be featured in, because it then
Mhm.
put your book pretty much all over the world, because you were then featured in Jet, Ebony, Essence, and anywhere where African American literary works were seen. And the editor in chief, we got to talking over faith, a faith conversation, and she asked me, was I an author? I said yes, and
Mhm.
I sent her a copy of my book, and they sent me a contract, and that pretty much put me out there, even
Mhm.
more so. And I wound up getting some accolades from that and some awards from that. And since then, I have, like I said, when people ask me to be involved in some of their projects, if the project is of value, because I just won't write anything,
Mhm.
I'll say yes. So I'm a part of a series that's called The Soul of a Man, where the woman who put together the book asked 13, I think it was 13 men of color at the time, to write stories that didn't have to do with sports or sex or
Mhm.
anything like that, just men overcoming negative situations through our
Mhm.
faith. And it could be fiction or nonfiction. That was 2009. We came
Okay.
back in 2000, and we were we won the award for best anthology of the year that year. Then 6 years later, 2015, we were invited to come back and do Soul of a Man Part 2. We were runners up in the same category that year. So we didn't win the award, but this time it was 18 men that was invited back. And then this past, let's see, another 6 years, 2001.
Mhm.
So another 6 years, we were invited to come back and do Soul of a Man Part 3, I Can't Breathe.
Mhm.
And this time it was to just talk about the difficulties that men of color are facing
Mhm.
in today's society. And again, the book was very well received. And the woman that published the book had said to me, she was like, I was so hoping that you would say yes, because I wanted you to be a part of this project because you've been here from the start. So I was honored by that. And I did a couple other anthologies that currently I'm working on part 2 to an inspirational fiction book that I wrote called Lukewarm Saint. So I'm working on Lukewarm Saint part 2, Fox in the Hen House. And then I'm working on another self-help book. And I have a ton of other stories that I'm just trying to rearrange my time, because that's something I want to do more of. But yeah, I try to write from the heart. I try to tell stories that people are realistic, that touch the reader, that you can identify with. And I think that I'm a pretty good writer, but the funny thing is, I guess I'm still a little funny with that. Like when I'm hearing somebody read something that I've written, I literally have to leave the room, or I'm that way. So I don't know if anybody else who writes has felt that way, but I'm that way. But yes, so I have a little bit of everything out there. But the way my counseling schedule has been the last couple of years, it's been really hard to sit down and just really lock in to finish. And that's something, I just came from a business conference this past weekend in Virginia. That was one of the things I committed to myself for 2023, that I'm going to carve out time to literally just sit down and get back on a writing schedule, because I do want to finish the projects I have.
Yeah, it is kind of like that nagging when you have those like ideas you want to put on paper and you
Yes.
just can't carve out the time. But yeah, it's good that you have that goal already in October for 2023 to finish them,
Yeah.
right? And,
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, it's been over those 18 years. Sounds like that you've been writing these books, and like you said, a wide variety. You know, I'll definitely put those names in the show notes. People can grab those books and learn a little bit more about some of your stories and what you've you know, encountered. So I wanted to talk about some of your mentoring and how, the influence that you have on. So first of all, you started the Young Kings Mentor Program. You
Yes.
said in 2010, but now you said before we hit record that the Young Queens program has just started as well.
Yes. Thank you for asking me about that. Yes, 2010. As I just mentioned about what I was seeing when I started teaching, I had been in the system for over 10 years and 12 years actually. And I just felt like something needed to be done. So in 2010, I was a high school dean in Brooklyn. And I said, you know what, I got to find a way to try to pierce this gang situation. So I created the Young Kings program, which is a mentor program where we took some very difficult young men, brought them together to discuss and have dialogue on the things that they seem to get out of being in gangs, but quietly work in self-esteem conversations, discipline situations, to introduce them to literature and other things that they may have never actually considered, but just to try to get them to understand that life is more precious than they believe it is. And we were very successful. I did it for 2 years at that high school, and then I went to a junior high school not too long after that, and I recreated the program there. So then when I left New York in 2016, I was away from, not around education at all. So in 2019, yes, 2019, I reinstituted the program because I noticed that here in Delaware, smaller state, but I started to see the inklings and the building of some of the negatives that I saw with the building of the gangs in New York. And I've started to see and talk to other educators as well as some of the police. And I was a former investigator. So I was an investigator here in the state of Delaware. And I started to just notice that I'm hearing parents talking about their kids are getting a little bit more trouble. And I was like, okay, I thought I was pretty much done with the school system, but some things you just don't get away from. So I reorganized my program, submitted it to a couple different schools. And one of the local juvenile detention centers picked me up in 2019. So my Young King program was recreated, and we worked with young men who were incarcerated. And the goal was to try to get them to understand what's needed to be done so they don't transfer to the larger prison. Let's try to figure out a way to get you into family court, get you home. So then COVID hits. And when COVID hit, everything was shut down. So we went virtual. So I shut things down in March of 2020, came back in July of 2020, and we went from July to the end of the year in January. And then the start of September last year, I was able to institute the Young Kings at another school. We had a great school year last year. And then this year is the first time that I'm going to actually be introducing the Young Queens. So now I have a female version to my young man's program, I have a young woman's program. But this time I'm going to be working with elementary kids. My Young Kings programs were normally high school and junior high school kids. So this year is the first year that I'm working with the little ones. And it's going to be interesting because of their ages. They're third and fourth grade, which is 8, 9, and 10. But I brought on 2 very capable young ladies who worked an after school program with my daughter. Now I have a daughter who's 8. So I'm dealing with this age group every day. So I'm used to it. But these 2 young ladies are going to help me with the young ladies. I'm pretty much going to give them the reins to work with the young ladies. I'll probably just oversee some things and just add, from my experiences, but I really want them to take the lead. And with the young men, I want them to work with me as well, because the one good thing about this age group, I can have young ladies work with me and we work with the young boys. So it's not a conflict of interest where they're not uncomfortable, because they're still young enough that it's not going to matter. Now, you get to the junior high school guys, some of the conversations that they want to have, they're not going to feel comfortable around women being in the room. But I think at this age group and having the 2 young ladies that I'm going to have working with me, and it's so interesting, their names, they're sisters too, Jazz and Symphony. Their mothers was music fans, and I just think that's incredible names. And because they worked the after school program that my daughter was a part of, I've gotten a chance to see them work directly in this element. Plus, they're much younger. And with this age group, I need their energy. I'm 54. I'll be 55 in December. It's not that I can't keep up with the little ones, but I'm older. So if I can get the help, and that's another thing too, is that I can orchestrate and then allow the young ladies to do the legwork, as they say. And I think that we'll be able to touch home, because for me, the goal with the young men and young ladies is to give them an opportunity to have conversations about things they may not be able to share with their teachers, with their peers, with their parents, and just to deal with a lot of the things that they're hearing in terms of social media and other stuff like that, and be able to solve the things that are myths and give them truth. And especially with social media, I recently ended a contract with the government where I was doing counseling work with the ATF. And one of the presentations that I did was protecting our children from social media. And the thing that I found, even with ATF agents who their job is to keep us safe, but as parents, they were lacking the communication skills on how do I address my child on social media? How do I protect my child from social media? So one of the things that we're going to do with both programs is have that conversation of how do they feel about social media? How do they feel about the things that they have access to? And how can we get them to look to protect themselves? As well as what I normally do, especially when I was teaching, I teach what I call inside out. I teach through the child back to the parent. So I'll give the child things that I want them to go home and share with the parent. So this way I can kind of introduce some things that may not be talked about inside the home. And the child can now orchestrate that, hey, I got this today in the mentor program. Can we talk about this at home? And then hopefully it triggers something for the parents to want to continue that conversation that we're going to start. So I'm super excited, and we start this week, actually tomorrow. So I'm very excited about it.
Yeah, and it really shows that you've worked your way from when you were a dean in 2010, and you started that program in Brooklyn, and then taking it then to Delaware in the juvenile detention center, but now also bringing it down to the little ones, and really coming full circle, and really seeing that. I mean, yeah, when you're able to pare it down to those young ladies and see where you can kind of intervene before, like I've worked with middle schoolers a lot, right? And they're already really ingrained in the social media and the bullying and online issues like that. So yeah, I think that age group you're talking about is right where it needs to be in talking about how we don't get too ingrained in that. So you talked a little bit about your experience in education in New York City. You've also worked in the Department of Education, and you've taught. So tell me a little bit about kind of some of the teaching roles, and also did you also work with elementary school kids when you taught in New York City?
Yeah, I actually had of the 22 years, 13 was middle school.
Okay.
I only had 1 year with elementary kids, which was my very last year. And so the other 8 was high school.
Mhm.
And the funny thing was, when I was leaving, I was offered a position with elementary kids, because actually, as a dean, I'm actually a disciplinarian specialist, if that's one of the
Mhm.
labels they gave me.
Mhm.
I come in and I'll set up the discipline that's necessary. I'll get the hallways clear. I'll give teachers an opportunity to teach. But when I was in the classroom, I was a health and physical education teacher, but I have taught math, I have taught English, I've taught science, I've taught social studies. I think I've taught everything except for music and Spanish, because I don't speak
Mhm.
Spanish. And music, I don't know what I was going to teach. We probably would be just in there sitting and listening to old R&B, and I don't think that's going to really cut it. But everything else I have taught at least once. But my specialty was health and physical education, but more so health education, because I really like the fact that health education gave me the opportunity to bring pretty much anything into the classroom, have a
Mhm.
conversation, because it was either dealing with the mind, dealing with the body, or dealing with the social aspects that children are dealing with. And so when I became a dean, the biggest thing for me, what I realized was that discipline has to be firm, but it has to be fair, but it has to be fluid.
Yeah.
Not every situation fits every child. And I found it interesting how many educators in the New York City school system came into this environment but didn't truly understand the children that they were working with.
Mm.
And it used to get me angry, but then I realized, no, that's because they don't take teaching as a craft. It's a job.
Yeah.
So you got 2 different type of teachers that walk into a school every day. Those that it's a job, they're just here to do what they got to do. Summer's off. That's it. And then
Mhm.
for others, it's a craft, which means not only do they love what they do, it's their art form. It's,
Yeah.
how do I get the kids to just love math? How do I get the kids to love science? How do I get the kids just to love my classroom? And you can see it in the way that the children interact with their educators. So once I became a dean, my goal was, how do I get new teachers to buy into this being a craft instead of just a job?
Mm.
Because one, it was going to make their lives a whole lot better when dealing with difficult kids, but also is going to give them an opportunity to stay around long enough, because the biggest problem that urban kids deal with is the departure of good teachers. So you
Mhm.
get a teacher, your 6th grade, but by your 8th grade year, that teacher's no longer in the building. Well, that turnover affects the way a child feels about themselves, but it also affects the camaraderie inside a building. Because I found in good schools, teachers don't go anywhere. They're there 10, 15, 20 years. So because I taught and lived in a lot of the neighborhoods where I taught, I'm on the second generation. I'm on to the cousins. I'm on to the brothers. I'm on to the sisters. And when I came, so I was at one junior high school in the neighborhood. And then when I came back to work at the high school, I now have the cousins or the brothers of kids I had
Mhm.
previous.
Mhm.
That lineage helps you with discipline.
Yeah.
I could go into the community to get things done outside of school because I had a connection to the neighborhood. And that's what allowed me to be a specialist when it came to discipline, because I knew what was going on before it came into the school. I was peeking on some of the kids on Facebook before this
Mhm.
became a thing, especially with gang violence being such a bad thing. And then trying to keep the safe, because again, having so many kids be slain in those earlier years, I didn't want that on my watch. And I've had, it's been very difficult. And I have dealt with every type of criminal situation that you can think of. And it's been very difficult, because you do what you can and you still are going to have people get past your radar, and these things happen and you got to be okay with it. But I work with police, have worked with police. And that was another thing too, is to try to introduce these young folks to police, to help them understand that not all police are bad, that
Mhm.
some
Mhm.
police want to keep you safe. And I tried to be that bridge. So for me as a dean, I took that very serious, where I knew some deans, they were just happy that they didn't have to teach anymore. So they'd shoo the kids through the hallway, and that was all they wanted to do. And they hung out in their office. That wasn't for me. I was out in the hallway. I want to see what's going on. I want to see how you come to school. I'm going to engage you. If I see that you're not smiling, I notice that you normally do, I'm going to pay attention to that. And the thing that I didn't realize, that all of this was the predicate to what was going to be like my career now as a counselor. I was already counseling, but I was doing it under the educational banner. So as a dean, it was just something that I really enjoyed. but it was very difficult, especially in difficult schools. And after 22 years, the reason why I left early was my daughter was 2 years old, and I just did not want her to start school in New York City. So I decided to move because I wanted to put her in a different environment, because I felt if she started in New York City schools, there would be a lot of behaviors I would then have to try to unlearn, and I didn't want to do that.
Mhm, mhm. And so once you moved to Delaware, you set up the mental health ministries that you're doing now. Was that kind of that breaking from being a dean to working in mental health?
About 2 years, let's see, about 2.5 years. I got here middle of 2016. I officially started working for myself in 2019 because I
Okay.
was finishing up grad school to go back and get my human service counseling master's degree. I have a master's degree in education in specializing in curriculum writing, assessments, and teaching. But I went back to get a second master's degree in human service counseling, because specializing in Christian ministry, because I had an idea of what I wanted to do. I had an idea if I could get the churches to buy in, it would be the best place for me to be able to reach people.
Mhm.
So by 2019, I had prepared myself and put myself in a position where I could now start to do counseling work. I was partnered with an agency that allowed me to work under their banner. And then over the next 6 months to a year, I was able to establish myself as how can I put this? I was able to establish myself as the Christian counselor because I was able to pair the
Mhm.
faith and the therapeutic understanding, which I knew from school, but I had to figure out, how do I create this to
Okay.
be able to present it to pastors to feel comfortable with it. So it took me about a good year to figure out what that was. Then once I did, then it made it a little easier to have that conversation. So yeah, by the end of 1990 going into 2000, I was now ready to start my company. And that's when I created my second company. I have my own
Mhm,
publishing
mhm.
company as well. But this time I was ready and I was in a better position. So now when I met with pastors, I understood not only the language, but I understood how to show them the therapeutic aspects of what mental health ministries could actually do, and why it's imperative and required based on the Christian faith, which I happen to be. But I do work with everybody. I do work with secular folks as well. But because I am a Christian, it was the direction that I wanted to go in.
Okay, and then you talked a little bit about in the pre-chat about kind of the work that you do in the churches. So um, you not only work with local churches, you also sometimes work with churches in other states because you're noticing the pastors are feeling overwhelmed, even if it's a larger church that has several different pastors. um, you know, uh, you mentioned the pre-chat, the Lord says we're supposed to take care of our brothers and sisters. And I think that burden is often on the church staff, right? So being able to
Mhm.
pair with somebody like you. So what would you be able to offer churches that aren't necessarily in Delaware?
Again, I appreciate it. That's a great question. I thank you for asking that. Basically, what I do is I'm an outside agent. And here's how this works. Most people who attend church enjoy their church. They enjoy their pastor, they enjoy what the church is offering. So when now we're talking about the things that are wrong in somebody's life, a lot of people are uncomfortable with sharing, I want to say, dirt about
Yeah.
themselves, because they don't want to, one, be judged. Two, they just feel uncomfortable that now they have to share with the body of the church that they're now going to be amongst on a regular basis, because we're talking about some very heavy issues that could be anything. So what I offer and what I explain to the pastors is that, look at it like this. If you're their primary care physician, you're their doctor, you're the one that they see, they got a cough, they coming to see you. But if you realize that the heart, the ear, the nose, the back, whatever it is, needs a specialist, you would write a referral and say, go see this doctor. They'll treat you for that. And then you come back to me. That's what I do. Now, the pastor doesn't stop being your pastor. What a pastor does, if he does his homework or she does her homework like they're supposed to, they vet me to make sure that my knowledge, my information, my education is all on point. And then what happens is they refer their parishioner to me, because now that weight is off for the pastor. And as an outside entity, I am not a member of the church. I am an outside clinician who's coming in to help fix a problem or to maintain the work that's necessary to help you deal with your problem,
Yeah.
but you are still a member of your church. Now, what I do require is that I require pastors to cover some of the bill for those individuals because you're supposed to, because the church is supposed to be able to offer that outreach if somebody needs care. That's part of what tithing is about. And so what I do is I ask the person, how much of my services can you afford? I'll give you an example. Let's say I charge 100. Let's say I normally charge 150, $200. Okay. I'll reduce that to $125 for the church. I'll ask the person, how much can you pay? How much can you afford to pay? They don't even know how much I charge. And they say, I only got about $50 a session. No problem. We'll take that. Let's go. And the church covers the other 75. The parishioner never knows how much the church is covering for them. They're just paying what they can. Their church is covering the rest. And it's a win-win-win situation for this reason. One, I have reduced my prices so the church is getting a discount. The church is paying the difference for the person who needs the care, and the person is paying what they can, but they are getting top flight professional care. And once the person is healed or healing or in a position of maintenance, what do they say about their church? You have to come to my church because my church helps take care of me. So now the pastor is the superhero, not me. I just do what I do. But what happens is, who's going to stop coming to church if their church is paying for the services that they need and the services are working? Now everyone is glorified because, again, all as members of the faith, our deity is glorified because we're all working together and healing is happening and the church is at the forefront. And the good thing is, as the outside agent, I have ethics. So what I talk about with the parishioners does not get back to the pastors. The only thing I might ask the pastor for is maybe a couple of scriptures if I need them. I actually don't, because I'm very vested in the Bible itself. So at this point, also I offer the churches, if they need me to come and speak, or if they would like me to do some group work in other circumstances, we'll work that out. And I'm always going to give them a discount because I do regular business with them. And what this does, it removes the insurance companies telling me what I can and cannot talk about. And I'll give you an example. Is I still partner with an agency that I have a couple of Medicaid clients that I work with. One of the clients, the mother is very, very religious based. She is just centered on her religion. And I realized that the faith would allow me to offer her ways to be able to lower her anxiety. So we talked about it. We even talked about the homework was how she's going to use her faith to be able to study, as well as when she finds herself being anxious, she can go and sit down. I taught her some breathing and taught her, you're going to read some of the scriptures, you're going to do this, and we're going to journal. Things that I would do in a secular way, just minus the Bible. Wrote my notes for the insurance company. And then I got the agency got a letter back saying they weren't going to pay for the 2 or 3 services that I provided this person. Agency said, why? And they said, well, we noticed that in your therapist's notes, he referred to religion 2 or 3 times in 2 or 3 sessions. We're not comfortable with that. And when I had a conversation with the gentleman from the agency, he was kind of stuck because he wasn't sure if he really wanted to fight with the insurance companies because he's thinking of the agency on a whole. I said, well, if you don't mind me speaking on your behalf for my money, I would love to speak to him. So when I spoke to the agency, and the insurance company will not put any insurance companies out there. We don't do that. And I said, please explain to me why it's a problem. If you read the notes, you would see that it reduces her anxiety, as well as it puts her in a calm place, which is what the goal of the therapeutic procedure that I use. How is that a problem? And they were like, well, if we open up that door to religion, we got it. And they were talking about all the other religions. I got it. And I got it. That's when I said to myself, no, I'm not going through somebody else to be told what I can and cannot do. When I know what I'm doing is working and helping other people. So another reason that I go through churches to do what I do, I take the term therapy off the table. So I'm a crisis specialist and a professional counselor. And by working with the churches directly and taking the middleman out, because the church is paying for me to be there, I don't have to go through an insurance company to make my money. And the person gets the help that they need. And I can fully use anything that's available to me to help this person get the care that they need. So, and it also allows me to work cross state lines. So
Mhm.
as I mentioned to you before, I have a church in Maryland that I work with. I have a church in Alabama I work with, and I'm actually in the process, a gentleman from Texas, we're in conversations with a couple of churches in Texas, and I'm praying on that I can create this database, because my ultimate goal is to create a database that will allow churches, when they buy in, to now have a plethora of different counselors to choose from, who are therapeutic centered but also faith centered. And then now, when they become part of the program, their parishioners would have access to whoever they would like to use to help them with whatever's wrong. And of course, the church will support part of the fee and go from there. That's what I'm working on now for the
Mhm.
future, to see how I can put it together. So,
Yeah, because it seems like this is a win-win situation for the client, the
mhm.
parishioner, the church, and yourself.
Yes.
But really, there are more counselors that probably need to be doing all the work that you're currently doing. So yeah, if you could get get a list of people, because yeah, like we know it's usually that you go through insurance and
Hmm.
all that. So,
Hmm.
so let's talk a little bit about your. So you do also educational consulting, mentorships. You have conversations sometimes with schools and districts about bridging the gap with race conversations. You do some presentations. You talked about the social media aspect. So talk a little bit about what if schools wanted to consult with you, what you could come in and speak about.
Well, one of the things that I do is I try to be as fluid as I can, like water,
Mhm.
because I think what happens is we get too stagnant and we get too rigid, and we have to realize things will change if we really present change.
Mhm. Mhm.
Right now in the country, we're in a very bad place, because everybody kind of runs back to their corner, and they're going to try to fight from that corner.
Yeah.
What I offer schools, organizations, or anybody that wants to have me come in to speak is that I play the middle.
Yeah.
And I'm daring enough to go out there. It's like, I look at it like a dance floor. I'll go out and dance first. And like most people, they want to dance, but they don't go out there. They don't want to be embarrassed. So I'll go. Come on, I'll go out there and lead. Because if we want things to change,
Mhm.
somebody has to be willing to say, I'm willing to come out here and figure out, how do we fix this, or how do we
Mhm.
work together? How do we do this? And I think the racial part is one of the biggest fantasies on the planet,
Mhm.
because skin color really should not matter.
Mhm.
We made it matter because of the things that we want.
Mhm. Mhm.
And after a while, when you establish a certain mindset, the only thing left to do now is do whatever you can to try to keep that mindset in place, because you're
Mhm.
gaining something. Well, the way to change that is to show that, one, that's not the only method of being able to come together. And two, that doesn't work. Because if you have nots and haves, you're going to have conflict. But if there's a middle where we can get together and have conversations, we can talk, we can actually elevate each other, well, then all of a sudden there's less haves and less have nots, and we can all share. The trick is, most people are taught to believe that we're in a deficit in the world.
Mhm.
We're
Mhm.
not. We're not. It's just that there's too many people in a small amount of circles that have more than they could ever have,
Mhm.
need, or
Mhm.
want. So you start to believe that there's a deficit when there's not. There's no reason why the United States should have the largest amount of homeless when we have the largest amount of billionaires on the planet. It makes no sense. So when you wrap color into it, of course you're going to have animosity. The thing that I try to do is try to explain that there's bad folks, white, black, and indifferent.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
just a matter of what the situation is, and are you willing to call it out? Are you willing to have that conversation? So when schools invite me to come in, I try to explain to, and I blow up the myths of color.
Mhm.
And one of
Mhm.
them, I'll give you one example now. Do you like any type of sports?
Really, just kind of winter Olympic type sports.
Okay, well, okay, that's even better. Winter Olympics. So downhill skiing,
Sure.
curling, which I still don't understand why that's a sport, but okay. So we'll just take the Olympics as a whole. When the Olympics is going on, you literally see people in whatever country they come from have no care what color the person is. If they win, when they stand on their podium and their anthem is being played, they
Mhm.
do not care that the person is whatever color. Why?
think they pointed it out a lot more in the last Olympics.
Well,
There
they
were a
did.
few African Americans who won golds.
Well, because when something has, but see, that's different. When something
Yeah,
hasn't happened, you
yeah,
say, "Hey, this is new.
yeah,
That's news."
yeah,
But overall, sports
yeah.
shows you
Sports,
that
yeah.
color doesn't count for this
Mhm,
reason.
mhm.
You will see, like right now, I live in Delaware. I'm a Cowboys fan. That's hard
Yeah,
because we're in the shadow of Philadelphia.
yeah.
When the Philadelphia Eagles won the Super Bowl a couple years ago, and I've seen this in New York when I was at Madison Square Garden. When the Knicks are winning,
Mm,
it's only 19,000 people that fit in the old garden. People are yelling and screaming and hugging and high-fiving and everything
yeah.
else. No one cares what color anybody is.
Mhm, mhm.
It is the minute that the game is over and you start to head back out onto 8th Avenue that all of a sudden everybody goes back to their position, and now we're ready to club each other over the head when just a few minutes ago we had unified cheer, unified joy, unified sorrow if the Knicks lost, which they did often. I made a lot of money on that, but that's a separate thing. So how is it that we can have unified joy while watching a sporting event and not 5 or 10 minutes later, just walking maybe a couple of 100 yards, we turn around and become animalistic? So if we can do more or recreate more of what we're actually doing during the sporting event in our regular lives, well, we would have the same outcomes. But we're not having those conversations, and we're not having folks who are pushing for those outcomes. So when you invite me to come in to speak at your school, when you ask me to come in and speak at your program, or you just come and speak to me in general, I don't judge color, I judge action. Right now, I have a 30-year-old gentleman I bowl with because I bowl for money. He's white. Okay. I was in Virginia for a business event. Him, my wife, and my daughter went up to North Jersey because my wife was bowling. He was going to bowl, but his ankle was bothering me, didn't bowl. Young white guy in the car with my wife and daughter. Why do I trust that? Because I know who he is as a young man. I don't care about his color. To me, he's family. So does it matter? And the running joke was, my wife always takes pictures when we're getting ready to travel somewhere. So she took a picture of her, Adam, and my daughter, and she said, getting ready to do what we do. So the folks in the chat was funny. It was like, hey, what happened to Keith? When did he grow that red beard? And hey, Keith, you're looking a little, you need some more sun. So they were joking and laughing about it. But the fun part about it is he's there with my family. Color, where does color come in? Doesn't matter. Because and I know he'll protect my family the same as I would, because we're friends. And that's the middle that has to be discussed and fought for. Right now, we're losing that middle. And when you lose that middle, well, now anything is up in the air. And this is what we're dealing with.
Yeah, I know, it's like being of that same generation as you and really not having really thought about race so much. And I know it's important to have the conversations people are having in the school space now and acknowledging history and things. But like you're saying, it's people don't really care if they're cheering for the same team, those types of things, right? Like, yeah. So I really enjoyed our conversation today. On all the things that you do. I mean, you have such a wide background as a writer and counselor and a dean of students. Out of everything we talked about today on the podcast, what's one thing you'd like listeners to remember?
I would like to leave folks with this. Now, are they doing see the video, or is it just the audio?
It's both.
Okay. If you're watching this, here's a wonderful woman who's white. I would like to think I'm a wonderful man who's black, if you would like to see it that way. But here's what you actually saw. Two intellectuals sitting down and having a conversation with the hope that everyone who sees us and everyone who hears us will be uplifted and moved from what they heard and what they seen. That for me is the goal. Every time I open my mouth, that is the goal for me. When I work with someone, when I'm working with someone's children, I have clients of all colors, and I don't care, because my goal is to try to save lives. And I honestly believe if we really want to change what we see, if we really don't like what's going on in the world right now, more of us have to get together and say, how can we sit down and have a conversation first, and let that conversation be honest, be truthful, be heartfelt, because we're still humans. We're still emotional. We still, when our hearts are beating heavy, we feel it. Somehow we done got so coarse that you can't even say good morning to some folks now and it turns into a fight. We got to reclaim this, because I just don't want to see us lose this, because I think that slope is so slippery that if we slide down it, I don't know if we get back. So to anybody listening, first of all, Dana, thank you for allowing me to have time on your platform. And to anybody that's watching, Dana, thank you. Because if you've never got a chance to hear me before, I'm not in front of you if it's not for her. And that is proof that if people are willing to extend themselves, you will come across some folks you didn't even know was on this planet. And hopefully I've made your life a little bit better.
Yeah. It's been a pleasure really listening to you and hearing your thoughts and, talking about these important topics and helping our kids. That's the bottom line, and helping the next generation. Where can people connect with you and find you online?
Oh, okay. I have two websites, but my main website is Braven Consultants. That's BRAVIN Consultants, CONSULANTS. I'm late. Excuse me for if I was spelling wrong. Teacher that spells things wrong. I'm honest though. Braven Consultants is my main website, but here's what I tell everybody. You do a Google search, you will find me. I am on Facebook. I am on TikTok. I am on Twitter. I am on Instagram. And I'm pretty much anywhere social media goes on. Just look up Keith, K.L. Belvin. All my books are on Amazon, but I would say come by my website first, simply because Jeff Bezos holds up independent authors for 55% off the top. Most people don't know that, and they just go right to Amazon to buy. Always get your books from the author directly if you can. So I'm everywhere. If you want to find me, you will. And I look forward to having a conversation. And I would say this to anybody that's watching. If you've seen me and heard me and something that I said moved you, reach out and tell me. Let me know something that you heard tonight, because I'm going to be honest with you, I love that. When somebody shares with me, hey, you did this, or one of my former students, and then can I leave you one last thing before we go? One of my former students asked me would I counsel him and his fiance for their wedding next year in 2023, and then said, could you marry us? So I was his high school dean. Wow. And some 2010, he was one of the original Young Kings. He is now a Division I basketball coach. His fiance is a Division I basketball coach. They want me to do the pre-counseling, which I'm currently doing. They want me to officiate their wedding, and they asked would I remain on to be their mentor, counselor / whatever it is while they're married, simply because of who I am to this young man. So if I don't start the Young Kings program and I don't help save this young man's life, it doesn't come full circle where now I get to help him say I do to move into a whole nother level. That's the circular thing that I'm trying to share with the world. So I just wanted to leave that with you. Yeah,
right. That circle of influence. And it's always for us educators who really, see the adult later on, and now you're able to work in his future wife's future, right?
Yes.
It's so great to hear. Well, it's been a pleasure having you on the Out of the Trenches podcast. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you so much. You have a good one. It was a blessing to be here. Thank you so much.